China is our biggest export market. Second, President Xi is coming here for the APEC meeting in November, and I thought I could combine the two by going personally to invite him to the APEC meeting. He obviously knows he's invited, and also take a trade mission and talk with China about the things that interest us in infrastructure, in mining, in agro-industry.
What will be the priorities for this trip? Because, of course, Peru already has a strong trade relationship with China. What can Peru gain from this visit?
Right, of course it has to be benefits for both, right? We already have a free trade agreement with China that was started when I was in the government 10 years ago. What's in it for us? I think, first of all, China has a huge experience in infrastructure, and we have some major infrastructure projects that we want to push forward. One of them is what we call the Tren de Cercanías, the neighborhood train, which goes from about 250 kilometers north of Lima to 300 kilometers south, that would enable Peru to have a metropolitan plan for Lima, which is a city today of 11 million people, and soon it'll be 20 million people. And the Chinese have a lot of experience in that. Second, we have a number of ports that we're trying to develop, and they have enormous experience in ports. And third, China imports raw mining products from Peru, copper concentrate, zinc concentrate, and I would like to shift that gradually to metal, to refined copper. And obviously I cannot do that without talking to the people who buy the stuff, who are the Chinese, the Europeans too, the Americans.
Now, the example of China, I suppose, it is quite a strong one. Do you think that Peru can do something similar?
Well, I think Peru has done quite well over the last 20 years or so. It had a dip at the end of the 90s. It picked up a lot of speed in the first decade of the century, and this carried through till 2013. At that point, the economy slowed some, not as much as other Latin American countries, and we see this year, 2016, as ending around 4% growth. That's quite a bit slower than China, which is at 6.5%. But it's still, by the standards of this neighborhood, it's pretty good. And we have very low inflation, 2-3%.
In your inaugural speech on the 28th of July, you talked about the need to have a social revolution in Peru.
Right.
And clearly, I think you were referring to the fact that there's still a lot to do, a lot of work to do, despite the strong growth that Peru has had in recent years. Water's a priority, clearly. What would be the other main priorities to bring about that social revolution?
Well, the first thing is education. I mean, we don't spend enough on public education, which is the key to the future. We have 7 million kids in the public school system and 2 million in the private system. And the quality is very variable. So education is number one. Two, we need to improve incomes in the rural areas, because that's where the poverty is. If you just look at the urban areas, our poverty rate is around 12 to 15%. But in the rural areas, it's 40%. That gives you the average of 23% nationally. So that's a second thing that needs to be changed. And I think the third is public health which includes water and sewage.
Let me ask you a slightly different angle, because I mean, you've been asked about this in your brief time as president, and your sense of humour. You have quite a relaxed style as a leader. How do you feel as a president? And also, of course, as you put it yourself, an English sense of humour, which I don't know if you think, I don't know whether you think so or not, but do you think that Peruvians understand your English sense of humour?
Well, I explained to the journalists here in Peru that sometimes I make jokes that are a little bit ironic, and maybe they don't get it the first time. But I feel fine. I think a president should be himself or herself. There's no need to posture and grandstand. And I don't like to be far away from people. I don't like to sit on top of a dais and wave at the crowd. Everybody has their own style. My style is fairly simple. I don't like to speed in a motorcade and make a lot of noise, that sort of stuff. And this interview's in my house, not in the palace. That's another example.
Yeah, this is a more informal style. And do you think Peruvians are getting used to that style? I
think so. I think they're giving me a fairly good approval ratings, at least for now, 60%, some say 70%. Of course, you can't stay there forever. But if you deliver on the things that you promised in your campaign, which is water and health, better schools, and a reduction in crime, I mean, those are the three fundamental things. I think we can continue to have the wind in our sails instead of a headwind.